welcome to the world of We Belong Dead. My name's Darryl Buxton and I'm proud to have been part of the We Belong Dead team since it had its first incarnation in the early 90s, and I'm now part of the editorial team working on books like Spotlight on Horror, A Century of Horror, Unsung Horrors, and our recent award-nominated book Into the Velvet Darkness, a celebration of Vincent Price. And we're talking books today. For the next few minutes I'm going to be discussing one of those publishing companies that will be a name that's immediately familiar to monster kids everywhere. Our generation that grew up in the 70s, we love books from publishers like Hamlin, Octopus. We revere names like Alan Frank, Dennis Gifford, Peter Haining. If you popped into W.H. Smith's or your local bookshop and saw one of those names, or an enticing looking horror photo or still on the front of a book, you'd snap it up straight away. It would probably cost about £2.25 or something back then, big money. But one of the major companies that our generation loves is Lorrimer. Now, Lorrimer used to advertise in the back of Des Skin's House of Hammer, Halls of Horror, whatever you want to call it, magazine back in the mid to late 70s, and they sold their wares on the inside back pages of Des's mag. And again, they cost about £2.25. You could send off for them. It was almost like a sort of preview of internet shopping nowadays. You know, you'd sort of put your postal order in the post, send off for your copy of whatever books you wanted, and then a couple of days later your postman would deliver them and you'd open up your package. You'd be delighted. And we're going to be talking and looking just for the next few minutes at some of the best remembered and fondest remembered titles from the great Lorrimer publishing. The Seal of Dracula. This was one of Lorrimer's most popular titles among fans, and probably their best written book as well, I think. It's written by an Australian called Barry Pattison, who went on to become a filmmaker himself. He was already working as an editor at this time, and eventually became a movie director. But we remember him best as a writer, and we remember him for this marvellous book, filled with great stills, as the Lorrimer books always were, wonderful sort of poster reproductions and so on. What I really like about Seal of Dracula is the big list at the back of the book. Barry did this huge sort of A to Z list of every vampire film he could think of, including all kinds of movies that were sort of on the periphery of vampire cinema, as well as all the ones that featured Dracula, Nosferatu and all our favourites. So yeah, this is the one that I think when you mention Lorrimer, people think of this automatically as one of the favourites. Here's the other biggie from the company, The House of Horror, the story of Hammer Films. Written by 3 authors, although you'd never guess it from looking at the text, which is in true Lorrimer tradition, it's pretty flimsy. They do profiles of 4 of the company's leading figures, and I'll leave you to guess who those are. And those profiles take up about half of the text in the book. The remainder is an extremely potted history of Hammer Films, written in really no more than a few paragraphs spread out across the main body of the book. But Lorrimer's forte, of course, was in their illustration, and the wonderful selection of stills and photos and reproduced posters in this book is really quite something. 2 sections that fans will remember, of course, are the little Hammer Glamour section with various shots of Hammer babes in and out of costume, and the poster gallery, which is rather remarkable because it focuses mainly on posters for films that were never made. So you'll look at artwork by Tom Chantrell and others, for movies that never actually made it, victim of his imagination and so on, Zeppelins versus pterodactyls. So it's almost like a little alternative history of what Hammer might have been in this certain section of the book. Another essential for fans, and this one was published in 3 editions with different cover art. Of course, you'll recognise Twins of Evil on the original version here. Yeah, so here's a selection of some of the other books that were published by Lorrimer that us monster kids loved back in the 70s. There's this one called Ape, which is devoted to the world of King Kong and his kin, giant monster gorilla movies, and a real range of sort of ape and simian type cinema in this one. Very interesting book. As you can see, my copy here is a hardcover, and the reason for that is that the books were published in hardcover by Bounty Press in the United States. So occasionally, if you're looking through a second-hand bookshop or you're browsing online, rather than seeing the Lorrimer name, you'll see Bounty Books. But don't despair, it's the same book and all of the same content. Yeah, just a quick run through some of the other memorable titles. We've got Freaks here, self-explanatory really. Cinema of Mystery, which doesn't give a lot away with its title, but it's actually a book all about film versions of Edgar Allan Poe. Rose London's book, Zombie, which typically for Lorrimer has some very, very bizarre subject matter within its pages. It sort of traces the zombie film only really up to around Night of the Living Dead, the George Romero film. So for modern readers, you know, you're missing out on what we know as the zombie history of the past 50 years. But for a bit of nostalgia, it's an interesting read. And for people who like their zombies to come from Haiti and work as slaves in the cotton mills or whatever, you know, this is the book for you. So here's a quiz for you. Which Lorrimer book has Jaws on page 93 and Charlie Chaplin on page 101? Well, believe it or not, it's Robot. Extraordinary. Typical of Lorrimer, really. You know, they do a book on robots in cinema, and maybe they felt they'd run out of subject matter on about page 80 or something, and they're desperately scrabbling around to try and fill it up with related matter. So they shove in Jaws as a sort of organic, robotic entity, and they cover Charlie Chaplin's Modern Times, which is all about automation in industry. And they sort of get away with these very, very tenuous connections sometimes, but it all fills a bit of space. They're all very nice pictures and illustrations, and it all lends itself to the overall mystique and excitement of reading a Lorrimer book. You really never knew quite what you were going to get when you picked up one of these things. I love them, and we've managed to trace, we think, 16 titles, although, as I've said, the Hammer Films book was published in several editions, and there are books that are retitled as well. Cine Fantastique Beyond the Dream Machine was also republished and reprinted as Cinema of Mystery and Fantasy. So, but we think we have tracked down 16 titles. They were all shown in our opening montage. So if you know of any that we've missed, please let us know. Thanks for listening. My name's Darryl Buxton. I hope that I'll speak to you again on the We Belong Dead channel. And, well, buy and read a Lorrimer book today. Goodbye. Thank you.